During my retirement party, my sons played a voice note I didn't know existed from a night I regret. "You sounded so small," one said. The next day, I got a letter from an old friend who'd been there that night. At my retirement party, my adult sons played an old voicemail of me from 20 years ago, a night when I was shattered and broken, shortly after my husband abandoned our family. I didn't know the message still existed, and hearing it again, especially in front of a crowd, was humiliating. But then, the next morning, I received a letter from a long-lost friend, someone who'd actually been with me that night and remembered things I'd completely forgotten. What started as pain and embarrassment has slowly unraveled decades of silence, healing, and finally, reconnection. "You sounded so small, Mom," Nolan had said, not unkindly, but with this softness in his voice that somehow made it worse. I had just listened to my own voice, broken, slurred, desperate, spill out of a speakerphone in a dimly lit banquet hall surrounded by old coworkers and distant family. And I hadn't even known the voicemail still existed. The party was meant to be a celebration. My retirement, after almost 4 decades working in public education in Rochester, New York. I expected a few cards, some half-hearted speeches, and a catered sheet cake. But my sons, Louis and Nolan, had clearly planned something more personal. Too personal. The recording caught me completely off guard. "Alan." I don't even know what to say, my voice, crackled. "You're a coward. You left without saying goodbye. You left me with 2 boys who asked me all morning why Daddy didn't come home, and I lied, Alan. I lied to protect them from you. There was more." My voice trembled, warbled. The entire room had gone still. And then Nolan, standing at the front of the room, phone still in hand, added his commentary like it was a TED Talk. "She sounded so small," he said, "but she still raised us into the people we are." There was applause. A few people wiped tears. I sat there like someone had stripped the last 20 years of strength and dignity from my chest and tossed it into the spotlight. I left early. The next morning, still emotionally hungover, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name in looping script I hadn't seen in ages. "You were not alone that night. Call me, Celeste." Celeste Fairmont. I hadn't spoken to her in more than 20 years. We were inseparable in college, roommates, soul sisters, the kind of friend who could read your breath. But life, as it does, dragged us in different directions. She moved south. I married Alan. We exchanged the occasional card until, eventually, even that stopped. My hand shook as I held the note. There are certain moments in life that make time slow down, not out of beauty or awe, but because something long buried suddenly rises to the surface. This was one of those moments. I sat at the kitchen table for almost an hour, holding the letter, sipping cold coffee, trying to summon 1,000 memories that had been shelved away and collecting dust. I called her. "Hello," she answered, her voice familiar and unchanged, slightly husky, like she'd just woken up from a dream. "It's Ria." There was a beat of silence. Then, "I was wondering how long it would take you." We agreed to meet the next afternoon. The Lamberton Conservatory had always been our sanctuary. It's warm year-round, full of exotic plants and the comforting hum of a temperature-controlled greenhouse. We used to go there in our 20s, on Sundays after too much wine the night before. Celeste was already there when I arrived. She was older, of course, like I was. Her hair, once ink black, had given itself over to silver, but her eyes, sharp hazel, were exactly the same. She wore a blue scarf that looked like something I might have borrowed from her in 1981. "You look exactly the same," she said, smiling. "Liar." I smiled back. We didn't hug right away. That came later, after the first story. "You remember that night?" she asked, sitting on a bench near the orchids. "Barely," I admitted. "I was there." I blinked. "What?" "I was staying with you. You'd invited me up because Alan was out of town. Or at least that's what he told you." I came up from Philly with a duffel bag and wine and some old VHS tapes, remember? Now that she said it, I did remember, bits and pieces. You were on the floor, she said gently. In your pajamas, holding your wedding album. You were crying. I sat next to you for hours. I felt the air go thin in my lungs. I must have blocked it all out, I whispered. You asked me to take a picture, she said, digging into her bag. She pulled out a small, faded Polaroid. In it, I was sitting cross-legged in our old linoleum-floored kitchen, eyes red, cheeks damp, and Celeste next to me, arm looped around my shoulders. I stared at it. I don't remember this. I do, she said. It's the night you left that message. You told me it helped to say it out loud, even if he'd never hear it. We sat there in silence for a while, the sound of a small indoor waterfall bubbling behind us. Why didn't we keep in touch? I asked finally. You stopped writing, she said. Not accusing. Just fact. I lowered my eyes. Everything fell apart, I said. Alan left. The boys were confused. I was drowning. I just shut off. She nodded. I figured. I didn't want to push you. Her presence, even now, was calming. Grounding. Like the best parts of my younger self were sitting beside me again. I still have the cassette, she said suddenly. What? The voicemail. I kept it. You gave it to me before I left that weekend. Said you wanted to remember what it felt like to finally let it out. It didn't make sense, not at first. Why would I ever want to remember that kind of pain? But I think, deep down, I had hoped someone would bear witness to it. And Celeste had. Back home that evening, the house felt unfamiliar. Nolan's words rang in my ears. You sounded so small. What struck me most wasn't the fragility of my past, it was the way my sons had heard it and interpreted it as strength. I had spent years hiding that night from them. From myself. I thought it made me weak. But they had taken it as a testament. Proof that I had been hurt, yes, but also that I'd survived. When I finally worked up the courage to ask Nolan and Lewis about the voicemail, they were quiet. Thoughtful. They told me they'd found it while digitizing old tapes from the basement. They weren't trying to hurt me, they genuinely thought it was powerful. Maybe we should have asked, Lewis admitted. You think? I said, half smiling. I told them about Celeste. About how she'd been there. About the photo, the letter, the memory I'd erased. Do you think you want to see her again? Nolan asked. I already have, I said. The conversation faded into quiet, comfortable stillness. For the first time in years, it felt like the house had exhaled. The days that followed were heavy but not unbearable. I found myself reaching for the photo Celeste had given me more often than I expected, studying the expressions, the moment frozen in time. I looked worn out in the image, but there was something about the way she had her arm around me, something grounding, protective. I hadn't realized how deeply I'd buried those years. Retirement had always felt like something I was walking toward, a peaceful final chapter. But in reality, it was more like opening a door to a room I hadn't been in for decades, only to find dust, boxes, and memories stacked floor to ceiling, demanding to be sorted through. Celeste called a few days later. I found some old letters you wrote, she said over the phone. From when we were in grad school. Do you remember calling your thesis The Art of Remaining? I laughed. That's incredibly dramatic. You were dramatic, she said, amused. But you were always honest. Honesty hadn't come easily in recent years. Most of my life had been built around stability, for the boys, for my job, for my own survival. There wasn't much room for unfiltered truth. The voicemail had undone that carefully constructed scaffolding. That weekend, I invited Celeste over. She brought lemon bars and a photo album I didn't remember contributing to. We sat in the living room with old jazz playing low in the background and went through each picture like archaeologists unearthing relics. She pointed to a photo of us on a ferry to Toronto. You were in love with the idea of escaping back then. Still am, I said, though there was less bite in it now. After a while, we fell into a comfortable quiet. I looked over at her. I can't believe you kept all this. I didn't want to forget who we were, she said. I thought about all the things I had forgotten. Or forced myself to. That night, the one they played at the party, I remembered drinking Riesling from a coffee mug and staring at the clock. I remembered pacing the hallway and checking the boys in their beds 3 times before finally sitting down in the kitchen, my back against the cabinet. I had thought I was alone. Utterly alone. But I wasn't. Celeste had been there. And now, 2 decades later, she still was. The following week, I visited Louis. He lived in the suburbs, married, 2 daughters who always greeted me like I was Santa Claus reincarnated. While they played in the backyard, I stood by the kitchen counter, nursing a tea, watching his wife rinse strawberries at the sink. I think I handled it badly, Louis said quietly beside me. The voicemail. I didn't think about how it might feel for you. We were proud of you. I nodded, letting his words hang there for a while. You thought of it as a victory, I said. Yeah. It was raw, but you were still standing. I didn't feel like I was standing back then. You fooled us. It wasn't an accusation, just observation. I watched his girls chase each other with squirt guns outside. Nolan would have been the one wielding the bigger water blaster, soaking his brother until they both cried. I tried to protect you boys, I said. I thought shielding you from the worst parts would somehow save you from them. Louis didn't respond right away. Then, softly, you did protect us. You just didn't protect yourself. That stuck with me. On the drive home, I pulled into a small overlook near Lake Ontario. I used to take the boys there for ice cream in the summers, sitting in the car with the windows down, salt air tangling our hair. I hadn't been back in years. I sat there a long time, watching the tide shift, people come and go, the sky slowly bruising into early dusk. Everything that had been closed for so long, my past, my memories, even my connection to Celeste, was now open, exposed. I wasn't sure yet if it was healing or just raw. But at least it was real. Celeste and I began to meet weekly. Sometimes at my place, sometimes at hers. She'd moved into a cozy home near Highland Park, small garden, porch swing, overgrown ivy trailing along the fencing. There were no long, dramatic conversations, just small ones. Subtle ones. We cooked together. Walked. She showed me how to use watercolor pencils, I taught her how to knit. It was gentle. I hadn't realized how much of my adult life had been spent in fight mode. Fighting to keep things stable. Fighting to not fall apart. Fighting to stay composed for the boys, the job, the people who looked up to me. But with her, I didn't have to fight. One evening, while peeling carrots in her kitchen, she said quietly, "Do you ever regret not choosing differently?" I didn't answer right away. I regret not choosing myself, I said. For a long time, I didn't know I could. She nodded. We didn't need to explain the rest. The last thing I expected in all this was for Alan to call. But he did. It was around 10 on a Tuesday night. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. But curiosity, habit, won out. "Ria," he said, voice thinner, older. "Alan," I said simply. "I heard about your party." I didn't ask how. People talk. The world is small. There was a pause. Then, the boys played something. A recording. Someone sent it to me. Of course they had. I didn't know you still had that, he added. I didn't. They found it. I sounded awful. I didn't say anything. I'm sorry, he said. I waited. For what, I'm not sure. Maybe for more. Maybe for him to fall to pieces or try to justify what he did. But there was just silence. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. I've been thinking about those years. About what I did. I was a coward. Yes, I said quietly. I left a mess. I looked around my kitchen, the clean countertops, the worn cutting board, a tea towel draped over the sink. I had rebuilt everything. You did, I said. But I cleaned it up. He sighed. You always were stronger than me. That wasn't what I needed to hear. Not really. But I didn't want more from him. I didn't need closure from someone who hadn't stuck around. I already had it. From Celeste. From my sons. From myself. Still, I ended the call gently. Take care of yourself, Alan. And I meant it. A few days after Alan's unexpected call, I told Celeste about it. We were sitting on the porch of her house, late afternoon sun slipping through the trees. She had just poured us some iced chamomile tea, and we were watching a pair of squirrels chase each other around the bird feeder. The simplicity of the moment contrasted sharply with the heaviness I'd carried the night before. I didn't expect him to say sorry, I said. Celeste raised her eyebrows slightly. Did it help? I don't know, I answered truthfully. I think it mattered more that he said it than what he actually said. We sat in silence for a while. I could hear the hum of a lawnmower a few houses down, the wind brushing lightly against the porch screens. You're not angry? She asked. I was, I said, without hesitation. 4 years. I was angry every time I had to lie to the boys, every time I balanced a checkbook that he drained. Every time I had to answer for his absence. I used to daydream about running into him at Wegmans and not recognizing him. That felt like power. Celeste chuckled softly. But now? I continued, it just feels distant. Like a story I read once. Sad, but no longer mine. The thing was, I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd built from that pain. It became my foundation, the scaffolding I erected to get through single motherhood, long work hours, tight finances, awkward parent-teacher meetings where I had to explain my son's home situation with a smile. Now that it wasn't the center of my identity anymore, I had to ask myself, who was I without it? Celeste looked over at me and said, almost out of nowhere, I'm glad you called me. That you didn't just throw the letter out. I smiled. I almost did. We both laughed, not because it was funny, but because we knew how easy it is to let something important slip past when you're afraid to open an old wound. Around the same time, Nolan started visiting more frequently. He lived closer than Lewis, and he'd often drop by after work with leftover Thai food or a loaf of sourdough he'd picked up from the market. One evening, he brought a box from the basement. My basement. Thought you might want to look through these with me, he said. I wasn't sure what I expected, but when I opened the lid, I was greeted by a flood of old receipts, notes, greeting cards from students, and folded-up drawings from when the boys were small. There were even a few cassette tapes, the same kind we used to use for the answering machine. One was unlabeled. Do you want to listen to it? He asked. I hesitated. Only if you do. He nodded, and I pulled out an old tape recorder from the hall closet, one I hadn't used since probably 2004. The batteries were corroded, so Nolan ran out and came back 20 minutes later with fresh ones. He was always like that, fix it now, don't wait. When we finally got it working, the tape crackled to life. The voice was mine again. But not the same message from the party. This one was different. It was calmer. I was narrating what sounded like a letter, maybe something I'd meant to mail and never did. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel, the recording said. Some days I hate him. Some days I miss him. And some days I wake up and realize I didn't think about him at all yesterday. That's when I know I'm getting stronger. I could hear the lump in my own throat. The way my voice softened toward the end. I'm learning how to be alone. And it doesn't scare me as much as it used to. The tape clicked off. Nolan sat beside me, quiet. I didn't speak either. After a long pause, he said, I wish we knew all this when we were kids. I didn't want you to carry it, I said. But it was part of our lives too, he replied gently. You carried it alone. That's what hurts now. I nodded, eyes brimming. It's strange, I said, how you can survive something for years and only realize the weight of it once someone helps you set it down. He leaned back on the couch, arms folded behind his head. I think you're stronger than you'd give yourself credit for. I think I was tired of being strong, I said. He smiled. That's fair. 2 weeks later, Celeste invited me to a small gathering at her home, a garden brunch, she called it. Just a few old friends, her niece from out of town, some neighbors. I hadn't been to something like that in years. It was quaint, casual, and surprisingly warm for an early spring day in Rochester. The table was set up under a large maple tree, linen tablecloth dancing in the wind, mismatched chairs, and the scent of citrus in the air. Celeste introduced me to everyone as her oldest friend, and I felt something loosen in my chest. The way she said it, it wasn't just a title. It was a piece of history. A recognition that we had been part of each other's becoming, even if we'd been lost to each other for a time. Her niece, a bright-eyed woman named Sasha, asked me what it felt like to be retired. I don't know yet, I admitted. It's like walking into a room you haven't furnished yet. You know it's yours, but you don't know what to do with it. She laughed. That's a good way to put it. Later, when most people had gone home, Celeste and I stayed behind to clean up. The yard was bathed in late golden light, and the sound of wind through the trees filled the air. You know, she said while folding up a lawn chair, I think that voicemail was a gift. I looked at her. You do? She nodded. Not in the way it was delivered, maybe. But sometimes we need to be reminded of who we were, so we can honor who we are now. I thought about that for a long time after she said it. Not just that night, but in the quiet days that followed. The version of me in that voicemail had felt so far away, but maybe she wasn't someone to be buried or hidden. Maybe she was someone to be remembered with compassion. A woman who had fallen apart and still gotten up again, messy, unsure, but present. The spring moved slowly into summer. I filled my days with small, simple joys, early walks through Cobbs Hill Park, reading on my back porch, organizing the boxes in the basement that I'd spent 20 years ignoring. My sons visited more often. Nolan even suggested we start a weekly dinner, just the three of us, something we hadn't done since they were teenagers. But the real shift came one Thursday morning, in the form of an email. It was from Alan's wife, or rather, former wife. Her name was Marta, a name I'd only ever heard in whispers from a distance. She was the woman he left me for. 20 years ago, she was a myth, an idea. Younger. Prettier. Exciting, I imagined he would have said. Now she was an actual person with an email address and a subject line that read, apology and closure. I stared at it for a full minute before I opened it. Ria, you don't know me personally, but I've known of you for a long time. I was the one Alan left you for. I've spent the better part of the last few years realizing what that actually means. The consequences. The damage. I want to tell you something that I hope you find helpful, or maybe, satisfying. Alan and I are divorced now. It's been 2 years. It wasn't messy in a legal sense, but emotionally? It was heck. And the ironic thing is, the version of him I got was the one you left behind, not the man I thought I was winning over. He's lonely, Ria. He's bitter. And I think part of him finally sees what he destroyed. I found your old voicemail on an old backup folder he never deleted. He listened to it the night we signed the divorce papers. Cried, even. He said you were the only person who ever really knew him. I didn't know what to say to that. I just wanted you to know that. Whatever closure looks like to you, I hope this helps. Marta, I read it twice. Then a third time. And then I laughed, not out of cruelty, but out of a release I didn't know I needed. Not a cruel laugh, but the kind that comes when you realize you were never the broken one. That the storm you thought would drown you had, in the end, made him the one adrift. Later that evening, I called Celeste and read the message aloud. She wrote that? Celeste asked. Word for word. And how do you feel? I was quiet a moment. Like someone handed me the last piece of a puzzle I stopped trying to finish years ago. There was a pause. I think it's time, I said. Time for what? To answer Alan. The email I wrote wasn't long. It wasn't cruel either. That would have made it about him again, and I wasn't giving him center stage anymore. Alan, thank you for your apology. I heard it. I accept it. But I don't need it. You didn't ruin me. You revealed me. And everything I built from that point on, our boys, my career, my friendships, was done without you, in spite of you. I hope you find peace. But I already have mine. Ria, I didn't hear back, and I didn't expect to. By the end of that summer, I was writing regularly again. Essays, mostly. Personal stories. Nolan suggested I start a blog for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal. I thought the idea was ridiculous, until it wasn't. Turns out, a lot of women read those stories. I received dozens of messages from strangers who had been through their own midlife unravelings. Some were young mothers, some were nearing 70. They wrote things like, "You made me feel less ashamed. This is the first time I felt understood. I cried when I read the part about choosing yourself. I wasn't just healing anymore. I was helping others do the same. And that felt more powerful than any vengeance could ever be." But still, there was one more thing. One final, quiet act that felt like tying a bow on a long-forgotten box. Celeste and I planned a trip. Not a big one, just a weekend in Toronto, where we'd gone on a whim back in our 20s. We booked a small bed and breakfast, revisited the ferry we'd once taken, and this time, we brought a camera. We took a picture. Side by side, older now, but somehow freer than we'd ever been. We framed that photo. And when I came home, I placed it beside the old Polaroid, the one of me in the kitchen all those years ago, crying, broken, with Celeste holding my hand. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. But it was justice. Alan had built his escape on lies. I rebuilt my life on truth. He ended up alone, with echoes and regrets. I ended up whole, with a life that was finally mine. And the best part? I didn't have to lose my soul to win.